r/NoSleep. Posted by you/FoxscapeArtist. The animals in this zoo seem kinda off. Part 3. Please like and subscribe to support us. We found Zarif in the tiger enclosure. What's more, he was the only tiger in there. The implications of what that might mean sent a shudder down my spine. Perhaps he was the first tiger experiment to be successful, after a series of failures? What if we'd visited the zoo earlier, before that day? He would have ended up dead, bones snapped off, in a pool of blood? Zara found him, technically. She saw a sign with a cartoony photo of a tiger on it and hopped off in the direction it was pointing. I hadn't even noticed the sign initially. The enclosure was empty except for a single tiger that looked unnaturally small, only slightly larger than a golden retriever. It didn't take a whole lot of detective work to figure out it was my brother. The tiger turned its head curiously and leapt up at the sight of us. It paced around the cage excitedly until finally leaning its head against the glass barrier we were viewing it through, and raising both paws. Its eyes looked hopeful, yet desperate. "Zarif," I murmured. The tiger kept the paws raised and blinked at me, twice. I wanted to chuckle. "Yeah. I was just gonna ask you to do that," I murmured again. "You talkin' to tiger," Zara put in. I shushed her and looked around the place. The door to enter the cage was on the other side, I could see it through the glass. But there was a 99% chance it was locked. I grabbed Zara's arm and went around the enclosure to check anyway, keeping an ear out for footsteps. None so far, nor any voices. I silently thanked the Lord that this was a large zoo. Maybe those freaks were all the way on the other end looking for us. Yep. Door was locked. I cursed under my breath and walked back to the glass. The tiger had laid down again, but got up as soon as we approached, an eager expression on its face. I was running out of options, and time. Could I break the door open somehow? But with what? There were quite a few boulders and rocks around, but the door was made out of metal. No way I had the strength to smash that open. The glass, on the other hand. I debated it. On one hand, letting Zarif out discreetly was a much better option, no loud crashes to alert those things. But I didn't have much of a choice. The door wouldn't budge, and the longer I took standing around here the closer they got to catching us. I picked up a boulder. The tiger immediately moved away from the glass, as if he'd realized what I was about to do. Zara looked at me curiously. "Big walk." "Yeah. Go stand over there, go." I pushed her behind a nearby tree, and aimed at the glass. The boulder was heavy and already slipping out of my hands. A resounding crash arose as the glass shattered all over the place, shards flying everywhere. I shut my eyes and cringed, while Zara cowered behind the tree. That was loud. The echo of it kept ringing in my ears for a few seconds, until it was finally gone. "Bah! Bah!" Zara squealed. That means tiger in Bengali. I opened my eyes. The tiger had climbed out of the enclosure and was nuzzling Zara, who looked delighted. Yet I still couldn't bring myself to smile. I would smile once we were all human beings and far, far away from here. Not before that. Tap, tap. I swore loudly. That didn't take long. The footsteps were coming from the path we'd used to enter the tiger area, and it was the only way out. Great. I looked at Zarif, eyes lingering on the teeth jutting out of his mouth and claws. Maybe him being a tiger, albeit a small one, wasn't such a bad thing at the moment. I wasn't about to just walk into the arms of whatever was coming though, so I slipped into the vegetation nearby with Zara. The tiger followed, taking care not to rustle the leaves. I was suddenly grateful about what a pint-sized tiger he was. Tap, tap, tap. They were getting closer. It was definitely one pair of footsteps. I squinted through the leaves, wondering if it was the man or the woman. Or the teenage girl. The person it ended up being completely threw me off. I rubbed my eyes a few times, making sure I wasn't hallucinating. Zarif emerged from the path, but of course it wasn't really him. The fake Zarif. The thing that had come home with us, the thing Zara had caught something off about immediately. I widened my eyes. It didn't even look entirely like Zarif anymore. The eyeballs were fully white, the iris gone, and it was smiling. The widest grin I'd ever seen, except there was nothing exactly happy about it. Its fingers had grown long and thin, sharpened at the tip like the talons of a predator. Head tilted to one side, it walked at a strange angle. I noted it was holding something in one hand, but I couldn't make out what. "I know you're here." A hissing, raspy voice sounded around us. I cringed, clapping a hand over Zara's mouth. The thing took a few small steps forward, the broken glass crunching under its feet. "You shouldn't have come back," the hissing went on. "Bad decision." I realized it was holding a knife. A large chef's knife, most likely obtained from the set in our kitchen. I cursed at myself for not bringing some kind of weapon too. How did I not think of that? What was I expecting to do here? Get Zarif, change him back, and rush off home? I guess I just wasn't expecting to get caught doing it. And I certainly wasn't expecting this creature to follow us here. The sound of the glass crunching interrupted my thoughts. My brain felt like it was going to explode. What now? The thing inevitably sees us behind a bunch of leaves, skewers us with that knife, or heck, with those fingers, and we all die? The glass. A few of the shards were within arm's reach. It wasn't much, but it was sharp. Good for stabbing. The thing was still wandering around the area. It leaned into the hole in the glass barrier and peered inside the tiger enclosure, back turned to us. I took the opportunity to extend my arm, fingers quivering, and grasped a large, pointed spike of glass. A leaf brushed against my skin, inevitably resulting in a slight rustling noise. The thing turned around, eyes wide and lifeless. The grin seemed to get wider, the teeth started to look more jagged. I tightened my hand around Zara's mouth and held my breath. The thing walked closer, head tilted, whites glistening. Closer and closer to the bush we had taken refuge in. I prepared myself in silence, mentally and physically. I had a plan. As soon as it was within my arm's reach, I grabbed one of its legs and jammed the glass inside it as hard as I could. The thing let out a guttural moan, a slimy yellow-gray liquid spurting out of its thigh in mounds. The blood sprayed across my shirt and I gagged. The scent was beyond putrid. Zara let out a cry from beside me, and the tiger seized the opportunity. He dove straight for the thing, claws digging into its chest, while it was still moaning in pain. More of that disgusting blood splattered out, some hitting the tiger squarely in the face. It shrieked in more pain as the claws dug further, until the tiger finally raised one arm and swiped right down the middle of its stomach. Guts spilled out in the concrete path, making a revolting splashing noise as they hit the cement. I noticed something throbbing slowly on the side of its body, near the hip. Is that where the heart was? The tiger noticed it too, still faintly beating, and stabbed it with a claw immediately. More of the yellow liquid spurted out, the throbbing became faint, until there wasn't much of the heart left at all. The air was nearly unbreathable with the pungent odor. I tried to calm Zara's crying, cringing at the sight all the while the tiger surveyed his handiwork. It lay on the ground, insides ripped apart and a wide, dark opening where its stomach had once been. It was the most disturbing sight of my life. It didn't matter that it wasn't really Zarif. I was essentially looking at my little brother's body, ripped apart, intestines spilled everywhere, lying in a puddle of blood. The shard I had jammed in its thigh was still poking out. I wanted to shut my eyes and erase the whole image from my head, but we didn't have time for that. I caressed Zara, who was mumbling to herself in terror in my arms. Monster! Monster! The tiger was nuzzling me. Let's go! I picked up Zara in one arm, wrenched the knife out of the dead creature's grip using the other, and carefully stepped around the body. Then we ran, Zara's quiet sobs and our footsteps being the only thing breaking the eerie silence. The familiar door of the staff room loomed up again, looking as uninviting as could be. It was challenging me. I dare you to enter again, Ifaz. Make yet another bad decision. Put yourself and your family in more danger. We trudged closer to the door, and the tiger looked at me curiously. Right. He didn't know about the secret laboratory shenanigans going on in there. The door was still half open. With Zara and I running away and those things scrambling to come after us, it made sense that they hadn't thought to shut it behind them. Good for us, I suppose. We at Monster Room, Zara said, not exactly looking ecstatic about it. I smiled weakly at her and pushed the door open, peering inside. The ghastly sight of the experiments in the tubes greeted us, some still moaning and crying for help. Others, I noticed, had sadly gone limp. I glanced at the little boy's tube, the one that was screaming for his parents. He was dead. The pool of blood around him had expanded, so I assumed he had bled out from one of the various openings on his mutated body. Places where fur was supposed to replace human skin, but instead never sprouted. To make things worse, the leopard girl's remains were still inside the main tube. I would have to drag her out before putting the tiger in. The thought sent a shudder down my spine. Blue button. Green button. Zara and the tiger studied the machine's control panel curiously, while I looked for a way to get the girl out of the tube. One side had a door with a little handle. Yes. Don't touch anything. We'll press the blue button when the tiger is in the tube, I instructed Zara. She blinked at me. Want a pause button? No. We'll press the blue button when the tiger is inside, I said, almost sounding snappy, but I couldn't bring myself to actually snap at her. Zara scowled at me. Pause blue button. I sighed. She wasn't exactly trustworthy. And I doubt she comprehended any of what I said. I grabbed her hand, sliding the tube's door open with my free arm. The girl's lifeless body stared back at me. I cringed for about the fourth time that night, and gently grasped both her arms. I couldn't help but mouth apologies. I'm sorry. I'm sorry this happened to you. And I'm sorry I just hid and watched. I wanted to save you, too. She was fairly heavy. I leaned her against the side of the tube and looked at the tiger. Get in, I said, motioning towards the tube. He looked skeptical, somehow. I was looking at a tiger, but could still detect a hint of skepticism on his face. I insisted, assuring him this was the only way. He reluctantly entered the tube, and I shut the door, but a drawling voice interrupted the session. So you did come back here. I thought they were being a little paranoid. I whipped around. The teenage girl, or the thing that was taking the form of her, was back inside the room. The door shut behind her in a sinister click, and she smiled. Zara lost no time in announcing, "You're bad. You heard Ifas." Loudly. I envied the lack of fear in her voice. Oh, to be a small child in blissful ignorance. She took no notice, striding towards Zara and I as we backed away. I raised the knife and pointed it at her, trembling like a coward. I hardly looked threatening. I desperately tried to stop the shaking of my arms, but it only got worse as the girl walked closer, her form changing as she did. She became bigger, amorphous, and her irises disappeared. The fingers grew long and spindly, sharpening at the edges, making my knife look pretty pathetic in comparison. The slow drawl of her voice was dripping with menace. They told me to stay here, in case you came back, it hissed. I had no idea why. What business do you have in our lab? The creature's eyes lingered over to the tiger in the tube, and it let out a chuckle. I see. Who was this? A friend? Family? It shifted closer. I suppose it's lucky to have such a dedicated loved one. Willing to sacrifice himself and an innocent toddler. I'm not sacrificing anything, I snarled, albeit with a shaky voice. Oh, but you are. It no longer looked like the teenage girl. White eyeballs, with the slightest hint of yellow veins, bore into me, its long, talon-like fingers clicking together as it shifted closer. Before I knew what was happening, its arm swiped right down the front of my body, knocking the knife to the floor and leaving me with a stomach scar that would last forever. Blood spread across my shirt, but I almost didn't feel the pain. I had picked up Zara and made a run for the door, stumbling out into the night. The wind stung my face like a cold, hard slap. I could hear the thing following us, the repetitive tap-tap-tap of its footsteps getting closer. Sinister giggling was rising from behind me, and the distance between me and the sound only got lesser. I couldn't outrun it. I couldn't. A clammy, ragged finger wrapped around my leg, hard, and I tripped on the dirt path. The cackling only got louder as I screamed in pain and inadvertently let go of Zara. The thing was dragging me back. Maybe it was for the best. Zara's best. Run, Zara. Hide. My little cousin disappeared out of my view, her cries of terror haunting my thoughts. To my relief, the creature didn't follow her, too caught up in dealing with me. I attempted to grab rocks nearby and aim them at the thing's eyes, throwing it off for maybe a second. Even threw in a trash can lid within my reach. I got up, starting another run, wishfully thinking maybe I'll make it, but F that. Running on two injured legs didn't help my case. I only had the lead for a minute or so until it caught me again. This time, it picked me up in its fingers and slammed me against a tree. I groaned in pain while it chuckled. This is fun, it hissed. You know how cats like to play with their food? A talon slammed down on my right leg, and I shrieked in pain. This reminds me of that. Cats playing with their food. I get why they do it now, it went on, giggling again. I was starting to feel faint, convinced that this was it. My legs were bleeding, badly. The scrape on my stomach was gradually getting bloodier. I would probably bleed out soon if this thing didn't finish the job for whatever reason. I thought of Zara, alone, probably lost somewhere in this hellscape. I thought of the tiger, still inside the tube in the lab, who they'd probably throw back into the cage after we were out of the picture. It raised its fingers, pointing them directly at my body. At least it would be over quickly. The thing was still talking, words I had no desire to hear. I can't wait to find that little brat and rip her apart after you. If she's not dead already, that is. I shut my eyes and tried to drown out its mocking tone, wishing desperately they weren't the last words I'd ever have to hear. Guess what? They weren't. A silver blade shot through the being's side, right near the hip, and protruded out the other end. The creature's eyes went static, the eyeballs no longer rolled towards me, and it froze in place. The blade disappeared backwards and protruded again, more yellowed blood oozing out of the wound. The familiar stench was rising all around as the creature groaned and stumbled backwards. Zarif, the real one, no glassy eyes, stood there with the bloodied knife, but he wasn't done. He repeatedly stabbed the side of the thing's body, where the heart was located, until it was no longer throbbing. Blood splashed out, making the ground around it damp and repulsive. I probably would have bled out in a completely dazed state of bewilderment had it not been for Zara's shouting breaking into my head. "You're hurt. You're hurt." I looked down. My leg was still bleeding profusely. I took off one of my socks and tied it around the cut, ignoring the physical pain. I didn't have time for physical pain right now. As soon as the creature was completely motionless on the ground, I seized Zarif and Zara and dragged them with me, running towards the exit gate. Before the other two, the man or the woman, found us too. I didn't even ask what happened, or how it happened, before we were far away from there. I wasn't about to be one of those dumb movie characters who stood around for too long and then ended up getting killed. We didn't stop running until the zoo was nearly out of sight. The glow of streetlights above us, we stopped at a corner of a road, gasping for breath. I leaned against a wall, staring at my family in near disbelief. No one spoke for a few moments. "Cool knife. Glad fake me thought to bring it." Zarif's voice had never sounded better to me, but I was still staring at them in confusion. "How did you Post the blue button when the tiger's in the tube," Zara declared. "You said to post the blue button when the tiger's in the tube." For the first time that night, I cracked a smile. A laugh, even. I pulled both of them towards me and we hugged, despite being covered in gross monster blood. "Correct, Picky. Good job. If you remember, Picky means small one." I ruffled Zarif's hair. "I miss doing that, even though it's only been about a day." "How do I know you're really you?" I said teasingly. Zarif shrugged, and motioned at Zara hugging one of his legs in glee. Yeah, that was proof enough for me. I glanced at my brother. I couldn't quite read his expression. It was a fuzz of emotions. "Are you okay?" As soon as I said it sounded kinda stupid. None of us were okay. Zarif looked up at me. "Yeah. Just could have gone my whole life without knowing what it felt like to stab and kill." Then he added quickly, "Even if they did deserve it." I nodded, putting my arm around his shoulders. "Yeah. Could have gone my whole life without seeing monster insides. Monsters are scary. Don't like them." Zara added, still clutching Zarif. She raised both her arms towards him, her sign for "I want to be picked up." Zarif obliged, cracking a smile. The image of not Zarif's body was still fresh in my memory. It would take a while to recover from seeing that. I tried not to think about it and hugged Zarif closer, but the picture of his body, inside spilling out, just kept looming larger and larger. It ended in me throwing up at the side of the road we were on, while Zarif exclaimed out loud. "Whoa! Are you okay?" "Yeah. I think I was holding that in this whole time." "Yuck," Zara muttered. "Ifaz vomits." "Sorry. Wanna go home?" Zarif asked. "Hell yeah. I needed to see a doctor." I started making up a story about how I had gotten ambushed and mugged by someone in a dark alley. You know, to tell my parents when they ask about the injuries. I didn't let go of Zarif or Zara the whole way. I kinda wish this story had a happier ending. It doesn't. It does for me, and my family, of course. But everything else didn't turn out too perfectly. I tried telling the cops. I told them to just go look, and they'd find the laboratory, and I finally got one police officer to come with me. Yay, right? Not quite. The entire lab was gone the next day, without any trace of it ever being there. Vanished into thin air, and only an empty staff room remained with a bunch of cardboard boxes. My guess is that those things had packed up their little evil scheme and left because they could no longer continue it here, after getting busted by human kids. The annoyed look the policeman gave me was pretty insulting to say the least, but that wasn't even the worst of it. Something was off about the animals again, but this time it was because they seemed too normal. No lions that blinked twice or parrots calling for help. I still haven't figured out why, but I had two main theories. One was that they had been replaced by real animals, and those things took the human ones with them. The other was that they were still the human ones. I wasn't too sure about how the mutation worked, but perhaps after you've been changed for a while your memories from your previous life start to fade. Perhaps they were simply getting close to becoming the real thing, or had given up hope. I didn't know which it was, but it would be a while before I went back to that zoo. I'm not sure where those things are now. That's what scares me the most. I'm convinced they may have just found a new spot, a new zoo, or heck, a new aquarium, to continue whatever they were doing. I don't even know what the end goal was. Some kind of takeover of humanity? Or was all of it just an elaborate experiment, for the fun of it? Scientists testing out some messed up hypothesis? I don't know how to end this. Thanks for hearing my story out. Maybe just be aware of photo booths and the like when you go places. And if the animals at any zoo seem kinda off, your best bet is to leave. Take it from me. Peace out. I Foz.